Hello everyone and welcome to 1971 Candidates match. It's game 2 of the match, Bobby Fischer versus Mark Taimanov. Now, as you've seen in game 1, Fischer managed to win the game with the black pieces, and now whatever plans Taimanov had before the match, now after losing in game number 1, he will have to play it a bit differently, as he suffered a loss with the white pieces. So now he faces Fischer, where Fischer has the white pieces, and we're not going to have a photo challenge, as this game is really long and crazy, and it features an excellent story, so we're not going to waste any time. Just to set the mood, here is a photo of Fischer and Taimanov, battling it out. Just to set the mood. Now let's check it out. Like we said, Fischer has the white pieces, and he opens with e4. We have c5, the Sicilian defense, knight to f3, knight to c6, d4, c captures on d4, knight captures on d4, and e6. Taimanov opts for the Taimanov variation of the Sicilian. And here Fischer goes for knight to b5. It's Tal says that it's not a move Fischer will often play, but here against Taimanov he decides to use it once again, as he also used it in the 1970 Palma de Mallorca Interzonal tournament against Mark Taimanov. If some of you are joining us only now, I will put a link to this game in the description below if you want to check it out. But after d6, Taimanov repeats the variation he played against Fischer in Palma de Mallorca. Fischer goes for bishop to f4, and it's very interesting because Tal says bishop to f4 is a move Fischer last time played some 10 years ago. Here in Palma de Mallorca he played c4 against Taimanov, but you're welcome to check it out in the description. So bishop to f4. We have e5, bishop to e3, and here comes knight to f6. I will just mention it shortly, as this is the position from the famous game Morphy versus Anderson, where Anderson continued with f5, and after knight to c3, Anderson continued f4. Seemingly Morphy has to move the bishop back, but here Morphy went knight to d5 and sacrificed the bishop on e3. After f captures, knight checks, king f7, queen f3 check, knight f6, and bishop to c4. Morphy created a beautiful attack that ended in one of the most famous miniatures in chess history. But I also made a video on that game, so feel free to check that out in the description as well. But let us get back to this game. Taimanov went knight to f6, bishop to g5. Fischer already plays for the third time with his dark square bishop. And here we have queen to a5 check. Here there's a possibility of a quick grandmaster draw after bishop to d2, queen d8, bishop back to g5, queen back to a5 check, bishop to d2. But Taimanov will probably not be interested in a draw, as he did lose game number 1, and Fischer doesn't even go for this. After this queen to a5 move, he blocks with the queen, queen to d2, offers a trade of queens, and here we have knight captures on e4, as the knight is no longer pinned. Queen captures on a5, knight captures, and now bishop back to e3. Of course, not knight c7 check. After king to d7, attacking the knight, knight captures, knight will capture on g5. And now you will not be able to get this knight safely back in the game, and of course this will not be worth it. So after knight a5, bishop back to e3 by Fischer, king to d7. A very interesting move. You can capture this pawn on a7, but here after bishop captures d5, and black's play becomes very strong, as he can get a lot of activity now. So Fischer doesn't go for this pawn grab. Instead he plays knight to c3. Knight captures, and now king to d8, making room for the light square bishop. Fischer goes knight to b5, yet again, pressuring the d6 pawn, but also attacking the a7 pawn. And here bishop to e6 is played. If d5, this isn't really a threat, now white can capture on a7, and this will be alright. So after knight to b5, we have bishop to e6, and here Fischer castles queenside, attacking the pawn on d6. We have b6, and here Fischer has a lot of options here. For example, he can capture on d6, winning the pawn back immediately. For example, after captures, king attacks rook, rook goes back. Bishop to c4, offering a trade. of the bishops, but black would have a very nice game here, and it's hard to imagine that white could push for advantage here. So after this b6 move, another move Fischer can make is knight captures on a7. Now, of course, you're not going to capture the knight and allow this bishop captures on b6 with check move. After the rook blocks, first you're going to capture the knight, and then you're going to capture the rook. But rather, after knight captures on a7, king to c7. Now knight b5 check, king goes here, and now basically you've given your a pawn, and now the king is guarding the d6 pawn, so the black rook on a8 will use the semi-open a file very nicely. So instead, after this b6 move, Fischer goes for the active idea, f4. We have e captures on f4. Also an idea was f6 for Taimanov, but then Tal says that after captures and the knight captures on d6, that the e5 pawn would be very hard to defend, and here Fischer could definitely push for a win. So after f4, we have e captures on f4, bishop captures on f4, and now comes knight to b7. Taimanov manages to bring the knight back into the game, and now comes bishop to e2. We have bishop to d7, pressuring Fischer's knight on b5, and now, again, Fischer can go for something like bishop to f3, seems like a reasonable move, but he will allow too many simplifications. For example, captures, rook b8, and after bishop to d5, f6, it will be a nice position, but Fischer thinks that the move he played is better. He plays rook to d2, preparing to bring the other rook to d1, and still keeping an eye on the d6 pawn. And here, what do you play here? If you play something like g5, not immediately, sorry about that. First, bishop to e7 was played, Fischer doubled rooks on the d file, and now what do you play here as black? Well, the d6 pawn is attacked 4 times. If you try something like bishop captures, this was played in the game. But if you try something like g5, you get bishop captures on d6. Bishop captures, and now bishop to e5, opening up a discovered check. Bishop blocks, and now bishop captures here on b5. The bishop on d6 is of course pinned. King moves, and now bishop captures. Knight captures, rook captures, and white would be up a whole piece with an easily winning position. After rook h to d1, instead of g5, the best idea for black would seemingly be a6. This is something that Tal mentions, but still, after knight captures and knight captures, it's hard to see what to play here. But of course, not capturing, then you allow bishop to g5. First, you have to move the rook to d4, and here you see that the knight still cannot move as the bishop on d7 is unprotected. So here, once you play something like rook to e8, white can simply increase the pressure. There's no rush. For example, bishop to f3, and only after you move the rook, now comes captures, and here, again, white would have a much better active position, but black could still play this. But instead, bishop captures on b5 was played by Taimanov. We have bishop captures on b5 and king to c7. Rook to e2, Fischer now says that he's done with the d file, he wants to bring his rooks over to the e file. We have bishop to f6, and now rook d to e1, doubling rooks on the e file, also threatening rook to e7 check. A beautiful idea. For example, if black tried something like rook h to d8, then rook to e7 check is coming. Bishop captures, rook captures, and now after king moves, bishop to c6, and you see there's the threat of capturing the knight on b7. The knight, there's no way to defend the knight, so after knight moves, you would simply capture a pawn here. There's no rush. You will capture this whenever you feel like it. You will simply gobble up all of the pawns, then capture the rook, and then win the game. So a very nice idea by Fischer after this rook d to e1. Rook 8 to c8, Taimanov doesn't allow this, he gets his rook away from a8. We have bishop to c4, attacking the f7 pawn, and the rook h to f8. Tal says that Taimanov is an attacking player, a creative player, and that he surely hates playing a move like rook to f8, having to defend this position against Fischer. And here Fischer plays b4, a very nice move. Tal once again compliments Fischer for playing such positions with such diligence. Now he creates a wall here. The pawn and bishop, not allowing this knight to get back into the game. We have a5, and now comes bishop to d5. Now attacking the knight. The threat, of course, again is rook to e7 check. So king to b8, and now comes a3, keeping an eye on the b4 pawn. Rook f to d8, and now comes bishop captures on f7. Taimanov decided to give up the pawn as his pieces are simply not active. So while Fischer was busy grabbing a pawn, Taimanov manages to activate his pieces. Bishop to c3, attacking Fischer's rook. Bishop to d2, now comes rook d5. Rook to d1, we have d4, bishop captures, rook captures, and now comes king to b2. d3, a very nice idea by Taimanov. King captures on c3, d captures on e2, and now rook to e1. Of course, you cannot capture this even though it's with check, because after knight captures, your bishop is under attack and you do have to stop promotion. So after king d2, you're just going to lose a piece, and now you're down a piece and you're going to lose the game. So after d captures on e2, rook e1, and now comes knight to d6. Attacking the bishop. Bishop to h5, and here, after Tal says that after defending so well against Fischer for the entire game, here Taimanov misses a better idea. Here he plays knight to b5 check. But better was, Tal says, rook to c8 check, because now after king moves, now you play knight to b5. And now after c4, knight to d4 check, and now the king will either have to defend the c4 pawn by playing king c3, and you will play knight b5 check back again, and then the king will either have to move, where you will continue checking him, or he will move back and then you'll continue checking him, because if he moves back, you'll grab back the c4 pawn. So an improvement by Tal, but here knight to b5. With check, king to b2, Fischer defends the a3 pawn, and now pawn captures on b4. Pawn captures on b4, and now comes rook to d4. Attacking the b4 pawn. We have c3, defending and attacking the rook. Rook to h4 with tempo, attacking the bishop and the h2 pawn, but it doesn't matter. Fischer plays bishop captures here, and now comes knight to d6. There's no time to capture the pawn, as the knight on b5 is hanging. So knight to d6, and now comes rook to d1, attacking the knight. King defends knight, and now h3. And after all is said and done, Fischer is up a pawn, but, you know, Taimanov should still be able to hold this. Rook to f4 was played, rook to f1 offering a trade of rooks. Taimanov, of course, declines this. Bishop to d3, and now rook to e5. We have rook to f2, h5, and here, after giving the position some consideration, this is move 45, Fischer played c4, and it was in this position that the game was adjourned. Taimanov decided that he will play rook to g5. This is the move he put in his little envelope, and he of course analyzed the position the entire night, and his seconds of course analyzed it with him, suggesting lines. But Tal says that Fischer was so sure of himself in this position that he will win that he didn't really analyze it all that much, which will be problematic for him. Here, like I said, Taimanov went for rook to g5, but if he went for rook to e3, this doesn't work. It's an interesting idea, but after king to c3, now comes knight to e4 check with an attack on Fischer's rook on f2. But here, Fischer simply attacks the knight and the rook, and after rook captures on d3 with check. Now, of course, not capturing the rook because you lose the rook with check. Simply king captures here, and now white is still up a pawn, and with a much more active king, Fischer would be able to push this for the win. So, rook to g5 instead by Taimanov. King to c3, we have king to d7, and now rook to a2. Going for rook to a7, of course, a rook on the 7th rank is where you want your rook to be. King goes to c8, we have king to d4, bringing the king into the game, into the center of the board. King to c7, and now comes rook to a7 check. Also an idea, this was found during the game by Yuri Averbach. He suggested h4, but it seems that although it's an interesting idea, it doesn't really work. After rook g4 check, king d5, rook captures here, and now c5. But here knight to c8, and it seems that black holds this, and it doesn't really justify the pawn sacrifice. So after king c7, rook to a7 check, we have king to d8, and here Fischer played c5. This is what Tal means when he says that Fischer didn't analyze it, too well at home. He was too sure of himself. If you ask the engine will say rook to a6 the best move, and slightly worse, but still you should be able to play this for a win, is c5. So the move Tal suggests is the engine's top favorite. The move Fischer played is the engine's second favorite, but both should be able to win. So okay, B captures on c5, B captures on c5, and now knight to e8. The g2 pawn is under attack, so Fischer defends it, rook back to a2, and now knight to c7. Bishop to c4, we have king to d7, and now rook to b2. Taimanov's king is now able to come to c6, and after king to c6, now Fischer will lose the c pawn. And there you see now that the advance of the c5 pawn was a bit too soon, and Tal's idea of rook to a6 was better in that position. Bishop to b3, and now knight to b5 check. You don't want to play rook captures on c5, because bishop to a4 will win you the game. If you block, then of course rook captures and king c4 will pin. For the win, for example, if knight captures, simply rook captures, and here you attack the pinned piece, white is winning. And of course, after bishop to a4, if you move, for example, king to d6, then comes rook here, king has to move, king captures rook, it's game over. So, after bishop to b3, knight to b5 check by Taimanov, king to e3, and now king captures on c5. We have king to f4, attacking the rook, rook to g6, and now bishop to d1. h4, we have king to f5, attacking the rook, rook to h6, and now king to g5. So here, Fischer's position is a bit better. He does have a bishop against a knight, but everyone's general consensus was that Taimanov should be able to hold this. Knight to d6 was played, bishop to c2. Now comes knight f7 check, king g4, knight e5 check, king to f4, king d4. Taimanov also improves the position of his king. Fischer tries, he's very resilient. He always wants to win and play, up until the kings are bare. Rook b4 check, king c3, rook b5, attacking the knight. Knight goes back to f7, rook c5, king d4, and now rook to f5. We have g5, Taimanov gives up a pawn, but he's able to simplify the position into a draw. King g4, knight e5, this comes with check on Fischer's king. King captures, and now comes rook to g6 check. King captures, and now rook captures on g2. Bishop to d1, rook to g8, and now bishop to g4. We have king to e4, and here king to g3 by Fischer. And it was in this position that the game was adjourned again. So the game lasted for very long, and this is one of the few games pretty much, out of the more famous games, very few of them were adjourned twice. So here the game was adjourned once again, and it's the problem for Mark Taimanov here is that this position is a draw, but as this game was adjourned here, game number 3 was started and already finished before they continued playing game number 2. Because, for example, adjourned games were supposed to be continued on Saturdays, and game number 3 was scheduled for a Friday. So game number 3 was already over before they continued playing game number 2. And in game number 3, Fischer won a beautiful, spectacular, convincing victory. And so, after Taimanov finally got back to continuing this position, he was already down 2-0 in this match, and perhaps he didn't have time to analyze it at home so much, and perhaps he didn't put up the resilience that he could have. So the game continued. Rook to g7 by Fischer, rook to f4. This comes with by Taimanov. Rook to f4 check by Fischer. King to d5, rook to a4, knight to g6. We have rook to a6, knight goes back, king to f4, rook to f7, so this is all still fine. King d5, we have rook to g7 check, king moves, rook to f7 check, rook blocks, and here rook captures on f6. King captures on f6, and this is the critical moment of this game. Very rarely that you will see such an important game in such an important match to have a critical moment on move 81, but here, of course, this pawn, you have to stop it. You have to go knight to d3, and then after you go to f4, which is a dark square, whatever white plays, doesn't really matter. Once the knight gets to f4, it will be able to prevent the knight from ever reaching this square, and this will be fine. So what's the problem here? The problem is, after this king to f6 move, Taimanov played king to e4. And king to e4 is a terrible blunder that loses this game, but you know, feel free to pause the video here and find the move that Fischer played that won this seemingly drawn endgame. I will give it a couple of seconds for you to decide whether you want to do it. It's a really important game and a really important historic match, so I guess you should do it. You know, thinking about this position and finding it will forever increase your vast knowledge of this game, and you will forever know it. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on increasing your vast knowledge. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, Fischer played bishop to c8. And now you can see that Taimanov missed that after knight comes to f3 to guard the h4 square, Fischer has this beautiful bishop to b7 check move. After the king moves, he will of course eliminate the knight, and after the knight is captured, then that is it. It doesn't matter if you don't capture it. If you attack the pawn, you can easily simply protect the pawn, and then it's again winning. So after bishop to c8, king to f4 was played, but now comes h4. And again, you don't really gain anything. If you play knight to g4 here, of course Fischer will not capture, simply king to g7, and only then will he continue pushing the pawn, as the pawn is preventing the black king from reaching g5. So after h4, knight to f3 was played, we have h5, knight to g5, now comes bishop to f5, a beautiful move, putting black in zugzwang. You can either move the king and then Fischer captures the knight, or you can move the knight and then the pawn advances. Knight to f3 was played, we have h6, knight back to g5, and now another move that puts black in zugzwang. King to g6, we have knight back to f3, Fischer pushes h7, and here comes knight to e5 check. Fischer plays king to f6, and it was in this position on move 89 that Mark Taimanov resigned game number 2, and Fischer is now, well, I would like to say 2 points in the lead in this match, but as this game continued after game 3 finished, Fischer is now actually 3 points in the lead in this match. So yeah, that's game number 2. I do hope you enjoyed it and that you're enjoying the coverage of this match so far. I already made a video on game number 3. I think it's like a year ago. So I will put a link to game number 3 in the description below, so you can now, if you're ready, you can continue watching it. If not, you know, watch it tomorrow or whenever. So I haven't seen that video for a while, and I will check it out. If I'm satisfied with how I did that video, as I did not use any of Mikhail Tal's comments, perhaps I will even repeat the video on game 3 of the 1971 candidates match between Fischer and Taimanov, but you know, I'll still have to decide on it. So you know, you're welcome to check it out if you think it's interesting. And if it's all right, then you know, right, you know, it's fine. You know, you don't need to do a video on game 3 again. And if you think it needs work, then I would even gladly do it again. So yeah, like I said, that's it. I would like to thank Jamie Comas for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. I will make one of them Morphy versus Anderson, the game we mentioned, and the other one I will make Fischer versus Taimanov, the game from Palma de Mallorca that also featured the Sicilian, if you want to check it out. So yeah, that's it. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, most likely with a remake of game number 3 of the 1971 candidates match between Bobby Fischer and Mark Taimanov. Thank you all, and I'll see you soon with hopefully another nice video.